when we talk about flexible working times, we hardly ever talk about managers. We mostly concentrate on employees. And today I have the unique opportunity to talk to someone who is really into this topic of a part-time managers with all the advantages and challenges brought by the flexible approach to working. Johanna Fink, would you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Hi, Monika. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here with you today. Yes, a little bit about myself. So, as you can imagine, I worked as a part-time manager myself. So it's always the history that, yeah. And it was short after I gave birth to my first daughter. Today I have 2 kids, and therefore I had, it was the first one. And I remember the day when my former boss asked me, hey, do you want to join my team? Do you want to be a manager in my team? And I said, yes, I would like to, but I'm going to have a child next year. And he said, and this answer I will never forget, he said, okay, when can you start? And so it came that I started after I stayed at home for 7 months. Then my partner took over and I went back to work into this new job. And it was very challenging for me because it was, I worked in the IT and tech sector. This time I was the first woman there in the team, the first woman part-time young mother. So I really felt a little bit like an alien.
Today, you will discover why part-time management is the future of work. Hi, I'm Monika Chutnik, and I help leaders learn how to lead their international and virtual teams. Together with my team in ETA Leadership and Culture, we make the change happen by means of training, coaching, or facilitation. This podcast, A Step Ahead, has been created for all who want to grow in such an international, remote environment, who want to grow as leaders, as HR, as change agents, and simply as humans. I will be delighted to know that you make progress at work in life. All recordings and materials are available at www.astepahead.pro. I wish you a sense of fun and discovery. Yes, I really believe it's the future of work. And in today's conversation with Johanna Fink, you will learn about why it's no longer an option, but rather a business necessity to work part-time and to have those part-time solutions available, at least for some employees. How part-time management is related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. What are some of the surprising advantages, surprising benefits that are brought about by working part-time? Also, what are some of the challenges faced by people who are working as part-time managers? Johanna will also be sharing some specific and very concrete hints and tips about what you might do as an organization to enable those part-time management solutions in your company, but to enable them in a way that fits your style, that fits your organization the best. I'm so glad I started recording podcasts in English on top of my podcast in Polish. Now I can see that it really gives me the opportunity to invite all various kinds of speakers and make extremely interesting topics available to a larger audience. So I couldn't be more glad about that. By the way, if you are interested in some previous episodes of A Step Ahead, they are relating to human-centered leadership, to psychological safety, to microaffirmations, on the contrary to microaggressions, or as a balance to microaggressions, and also what are Ukrainians like at work. So if you are interested in discovering some of that content, you might go to astepahead.pro, or you might also find A Step Ahead podcast by Monika Chutnik in LinkedIn and give your like so that you can be informed about the newest content that's coming up. When you listen to today's conversation on managing in part-time, please think about a person who might also benefit a lot from listening to this content. So that's my invitation. And now let's open up. The recent years have shown an increase of flexible working hours, flexible approach to the working time. And with this, there is also the part-time working time, which very well fits this trend of flexibility. However, when we talk about flexible working times, we hardly ever talk about managers. We mostly concentrate on employees. And today I have the unique opportunity to talk to someone who is really into this topic of a part-time managers with all the advantages and challenges brought by the flexible approach to working. Johanna Fink, would you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Hi, Monika. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here with you today. Yes, a little bit about myself. So, as you can imagine, I worked as a part-time manager myself. So it's always the history that, and it was short after I gave birth to my first daughter. Today I have 2 kids, and therefore I had, it was the first one. And I remember the day when my former boss asked me, hey, do you want to join my team? Do you want to be a manager in my team? And I said, yes, I would like to, but I'm going to have a child next year. And he said, and this answer I will never forget, he said, okay, when can you start? And so it came that I started after I stayed at home for 7 months. Then my partner took over and I went back to work into this new job. And it was very challenging for me because I worked in the IT and tech sector. This time I was the first woman there in the team, the first woman part-time young mother. So I really felt a little bit like an alien. But I have to say everything went well. My boss was happy. I was happy. My team was happy. And we worked together, very successful for many years. And this was the moment where I started to think about why I am the only one far and wide. So why are there no other people like me, or very, very few of them? Yeah. And it can't be because there are no skilled women outside in this work. Something went wrong. If you look at the career path of women, you have a lot of skilled women at school. They go to university. There as many of them as men. And then at some point, we lose women in the career path. And I think that's something that, made me the question and not let go of me anymore. So I thought of it a lot and came as it had to come. Today, I support companies in making part-time leadership or part-time management a successful model for employees, because I'm very, very convinced that it's one future working model that will be very important for our economy.
I got to know you because you not only are passionate about this topic, but you also do distribute and share a lot of knowledge by recording a podcast. Could you please tell our listeners a little bit about that?
Yeah, I produce the Führen in Teilzeit podcast. As I'm German, it is a German podcast. So if there are German listeners here today, they might be interested in listening to it. You can find it on any podcast platform. And since 20, I'm doing a lot of interviews with people like you, for example, who can tell us something about part-time management. How does it work? I'm talking to role models who are already on the job and can tell us what are their experiences. And yes, I'm sharing my experience that I made in the last years.
Yes, when I was a guest in your podcast, I was mostly talking about my topics, which is the virtual collaboration and the cross-cultural collaboration. But I was very impressed how deeply you were specialized in this topic of part-time manager, how detailed your questions were and how much to the point. So I thought I have to bring you into this podcast here so that you can tell our listeners about how it really is. So let's start from the beginning. Why do we want to talk about part-time manager, being a part-time manager? Is this a growing trend? How does it look like from your perspective? What can you tell us about that?
So first of all, I have to say I have a German perspective on the topic, and it would be interesting for me to also hear from you what is the Polish or the international perspective on the thing. And I think there are 2 main points why we should talk about this. The first point is it's an ethical question. So it's a question of equal opportunities, and I want to live in a society where women, men have the same rights and the same opportunities. It doesn't mean everyone has to do. It doesn't mean every young mother has to work. Yeah. If you don't want to, you don't need to, but there should be the opportunity. And in Germany, you can see women have significantly more sluggish career options. It's, as I told you before, we lose women on the career path. And in Germany, we have a quota for management boards, and we really, many companies have problems to fulfill this quota because there are no women in the career pipeline. And why aren't they there yet? Because they lose them a lot of years earlier before they come to this career point. And so I think it should be, a question of in what society we want to live and how women and men live together. That's the first point. I'm convinced that the reason for this is that we have far too few career options for women and men in the family phase. Yes, if you want to have kids, for example, you have to change your way of working. You can do full-time, many people do, but in Germany, I think it's not the usual way. Yeah, it's the usual way still is women stay at home for 1 year or even longer. And then it might be really, really difficult to catch up and to keep on working where you have been before. And if you don't want to get back in full time, you have to start working part-time, and part-time still is no usual working model. And it is more, we see it in, less important jobs or in less qualified jobs. You see it quite often. But when we talk about career options, it's no regular career option to work in part-time. And that's the first point. And the second point is we have a huge problem in Germany with the shortage of skilled workers. So we are an aging society. I think in Poland it might be the same. In Europe, I think most societies are shrinking. And so we just have a real problem for companies to find skilled workers. If you look at actual data, in Germany, more than half of the companies, 53%, could not fill vacancies in 2022. Mm-hmm. So it's really a growing number. And if you look at data 2030 and later, you really have a huge problem. And it's a problem that affects our economy because we lose money. We lose a lot of money. And in addition, there's a change in the attitude among future generations who focus more on their leisure and work-life balance. If you talk to young people, many of them come into the workforce and the first thing they ask is, can I do 4 days a week or things like this? Yeah, it's a completely change in when you look at the baby boomer generation that were very hardworking, and it was work and it was normal that that work and you had a little bit of spare time, but work was the main thing you did. Yeah. And I think in the future generation, there's another thinking, and maybe people are thinking, okay, I work to live and do not live for work. Yeah. I think there's a big change. And I think many companies have realized that part-time work is important at all career levels, but at the same time, the model often still doesn't work well.
Absolutely. So even though you highlighted that you're talking about the German perspective, I can fully relate to that. So what I would say additionally from my side is that an increasing number of companies gets interested into diversity and inclusion, managing diversity and inclusion, and plus an additional number of companies is expanding it into diversity, equity, and inclusion. So what you talk about in the sense of figuring out which working solutions might be best to particular employee groups, for example, to women who have just started families, this would be the equity part. Yes. So let's think about a solution that fits people who are in a particular situation in life so that they can stay with us and so that they can really contribute. Yes. And I can see the companies are learning how to do that, but this makes me even more happy that we are recording our conversation today, that we are talking about this topic, because this might be an inspiration for quite a few businesses to consider this aspect, of being a manager time. So that's one thing. And another thing is really the shortage of talent. So yes, I can confirm it from our side locally in Poland as well. You know, with the war in Ukraine, plenty of people from Ukraine came to Poland and they are living here now. And I was personally hoping that many of them would be able to fill in this gap. However, it hasn't happened so far because the skills don't match. Sometimes there is this language barrier. It hasn't really solved, taking any people because many of the jobs that we are talking about, the part-time manager, yes, it's already a highly qualified job in a certain industry, which requires specific competencies. And I'm sure that many people who have come from Ukraine have been able to fill in the gaps, but the demand is much bigger than that. So looking at options of how to activate talent, and it stays completely in line with the generational trends and with the trends of working remotely, yes, with the digital collaboration. So it seems that there is no way for us to get away from from being not only a part-time employee, but also a flexible time and a part-time manager. And when we talk about being a part-time manager, now, how does it really work? What do we mean by this? So, for example, I want to know from you, what are the working modes, working types, so who are the part-time managers? Maybe you have some observations from your side, how it really works.
The first thing, there is no uniform definition in Europe what is part-time. Yeah, if you look at Germany, part-time is when you work less than the weekly working time at your company. So in one case, you might be working part-time if you do maybe 36 hours a week, because in your company 38 or 40 hours are the regular working time. And in other companies, you might be also working full-time when you do 36 hours. Because the working time for everyone there is 36 hours. So I think the first thing is to understand there is no definition. If you look at studies that compare data in Europe, for example, normally they're used 30 hours and less as part-time. But if you look at Germany, especially 30 hours are already part-time in the common sense. So you can distinguish between two major models. And the first one is the real part-time. The classical part-time is around 20 hours, the 50% model. That's, I think, what is known as part-time and what still is in the head of the people when they are talking about part-time. But when you look at part-time management, it's not the common model. The common model, when you look at part-time management, are working hours between 30 hours and full-time. In German, we have a word for this. It's called Vollzeitnahe Teilzeit. I don't know if there's an English expression. I think it's a very German construct.
Part-time close to full-time. Yes.
It's quite funny. But we are talking about this area between 30 and regularly 40 working hours. And I think this is most of the part-time manager are working in this area. And another distinction can be made according to the working models. How do you organize work in your part-time management? First, one of the models, and that's very common in this 30 hours upwards section, is you do it alone. Yes, you organize yourself. Maybe you do things faster. You work on your efficiency and your efficiency of the team. Maybe you source some tasks. You do outsourcing for some little tasks, but normally you do the same work as other people in full-time. That's the first model. This model has a lot of advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is it's quite easy to implement because you do not have to do changes in team structure, you have to do a little bit optimization for yourself and for the team, but normally it's quite easy to implement. The big disadvantage is that you have a compression of work. You compress the work that has to be done in less hours. And that's especially it's a mental load thing. Yeah. And you generate more mental load for people who already have regularly in their private life things to handle. Normally you work part-time because you have things to do in private, because you have kids or you have to do care work for elderly or things like this. So you already has a quite stressful private life. And then you go into compressing this work life and really giving more pressure on this point. And I think that's the big disadvantage that companies really have to keep in mind. because you don't want your managers to fall into burnout situations or things like that. I think you have to be very careful with this, using this model. The other models we have are models where people share responsibility. So it can be one person you share your responsibility as a manager with. Then it's called job sharing or top sharing. I think it's a model that is in Germany, many people speak about. You read it in media a lot. But in reality, we have to say it's really only a really small percentage of the part-time manager who work in this model. But it's a growing model, and I think it's an important one, because if you want to work less than Vollzeit, Teilzeit, less than 30 hours, you have to find another way to organize work. You need another person with who you can share your work with.
Mm-hmm.
And the other opportunity or the other possibility is to share responsibility with more than one person. In German, it's called cadre or representative model. So you're working together with people from the team. Mm-hmm. For example, if you have a very talented person in your team and the person did already work for you the last years, you can try to share your responsibility with him or her. And then you are not at the same level of responsibility because you're still the manager and the other person is part of your team. But you also can create a construct like this. Maybe if you are not available, this person is going to jump in and take responsibility for you. Or, for example, certain tasks are going to be sourced out to this person. So there are very different possibilities to organize part-time management. I think the important thing to know is there is no general model that you can just throw out and say, that's always the perfect model. Or if you do 26 hours, then you always have to work in this model. No, it depends on your personal situation. How flexible are you? How fixed are your working hours? It depends on the job. What is the task? If you are working in a crisis management team, there might be another model, the right one, as if you do some office things that can work until the next day if anything happens. So the kind of work you do is quite important. And the third thing is the culture of the company. Yeah. In a company where it's quite common to share responsibilities and it's quite easy to work together as a team, you have a completely different situation than if you have a very hierarchical structure. Yeah. And it's always important to know who's in charge and who's responsible. Then you have to create other structures. So I think that's the things you have to look at.
Thank you very much. What I got from you are the three basic approaches, the three basic modes of working as a part-time manager. So it made me realize that when we talk about an individual person in a role of a part-time manager, we never actually talk about, or very seldom we talk about cutting up the working time by half. It's only, for example, cutting 2 hours each day, or maybe just cutting 1 day from a week. Yes, that's maybe we call it a cosmetical change. It's not a major change. Yes, it's just like decreasing the working time a little bit. And it fits what you said. The part-time is almost like a full-time in this sense, and it certainly might be expanding into it at certain points. And I'm very grateful for you highlighting this additional stress. The way I see it working in the organizations is the managers, especially the first line managers, they do get a lot of pressure, a lot of expectation, not only to run the team which actually delivers, yes, but also to network and to be aware of all what the organization is doing, yes. So the hidden assumption is that they will manage somehow.
Yeah.
And I guess this might be happening. This might be the case for many part-time managers that, okay, I'm letting you as a company, I'm as an employer, I'm letting you work less, but you need to figure it out yourself. So I think that's not enough. Indeed, that's not enough. Yeah. Absolutely. And can you tell me a little bit more about this job sharing in the position of a manager? How does it really work in practice? How might you actually share a role of a manager with another person? For example, do you divide it by those little areas of responsibility, or do you do it in shifts? If you can give us a little bit insight into that.
Yeah, the answer is again, and it depends.
Yes, I was expecting.
So it again depends on the job. If you have, for example, a job sharing model, I've worked in a media company for many years, so I know examples from there. If you have a chief in charge model, it's I don't know exactly the English expression, but if you produce media, there always have to be one person has to be there when in the production, and who is responsible for the whole process and the content. Yeah. And so there, a shift model must be the answer, because you always need to have a responsible person there. It might be the same in medical jobs. If you think about doctors, for example, yeah. You cannot say, okay, today we don't have no doctor there. He's coming back tomorrow, or he's leaving at 2. Maybe in a hospital, you just need to, the shifts have to be besetzt.
They need to be continuous. Yes. There needs to be continuously somebody available. Yes. So this is how it's done.
Then you have to divide the job regarding to the time that has to be fulfilled. And in other jobs, you can use completely different models. Normally, when you talk about job sharing models, you're talking about you always have elements of job sharing and job pairing. And this means you always have tasks you do together. That's the pairing part. Yeah, you define tasks you always do together. For example, if you hire new people, if you talk to your employees, if you make strategic decisions, these might things that fall into the pairing part. And on the other hand, you have job sharing part. And the sharing part are the tasks you divide. Maybe you divide it by projects or by customers. Yeah. You can't give a general answer, but you have to look at the job. And maybe if you have different customers, you have to look after, maybe one does A and the other one does B. But it always means the task in the basket job sharing, you have a shared responsibility. If one of the job sharing partners is not available, the other one has to be able to jump in and to help out. Yeah, that's the mechanism how it works.
I have corporate past myself. I used to work in large organizations before. And when I entered the free market and a few years passed, I started missing my, corporate environment and the plenty of people, but also some very specific and long-term job that I was able to do when I was an employee, yes, when I was a part of an organization. Because as a consultant, as a trainer, I come and I go, yes, I don't see the long-term outcomes, and I also don't have influence on that. And, it was already a few years ago, maybe 7-8 years ago, I was thinking that maybe I can combine my both areas of craving and pleasure. So combine the job of being a consultant and trainer available in the free market and a job within an organization. Obviously, I am in the learning and development function. And I even had a few conversations with some colleagues of mine wondering how to approach that. Yes. So in fact, I was looking for a part-time kind of a position, yes, some flexible position. Well, it was long before COVID, so the companies have not learned that it's not only possible, but sometimes even necessary. So the answer that I was getting sometimes from some HR was that, you will be employed part-time, but we still have a headcount, one headcount, yes? So even though we employ you part-time, you are counted as a one headcount. And it sounded to be a kind of an issue from their perspective, yes? Because it's visible in the statistics as, let's say, the doubling the headcount. How is it solved when you look at some of your clients, when you look at some of the organizations that you are working with? How do they solve this issue in the job sharing and the job pairing?
I think the first thing, many companies started really to count not only headcounts, they are looking at in FTEs, full-time equivalents. So you can have a closer look at how many people are really in a company, because I think headcounts they are not saying anything, because if that person is working for you 20 or 30%, I know that the social costs, especially in Germany, are higher if you're hiring 2 people on one position or one FTE. But I think that we are coming to the cost factor. If you think at the advantages you can gain from this model, you have to put those things next to each other and to think about, okay, what's really my problem? Yes, my problem that I have one headcount more in my statistics, or it's my problem that I don't find any skilled workers and that I need to generate employee branding advantage on the market. Yeah. Are those my things? Do I have to find a way how I can keep skilled workers in my company that worked for me a long years, and maybe they're having small children now, or maybe they have to care for elderly, or they want to have more time for themselves? Is this the reason why I want to lose them? So I think is statistic thing and money thing, we have to learn to generate or to find a new perspective on this. If you look at studies in Germany, we have studies already from 2016, and the government made a big study about the cost and benefit of, in German, the word we already talked about it, Vereinbarkeit, work-life balance. What does work-life balance cost companies? And their result was that companies who invest in these things can get 40% of profit out of these things, Rendite in German. So I think we have to learn to have to see things in the relations, and then we have to take a look at the whole picture and not only at one small statistic thing somewhere down there, because this doesn't solve our problems. And I think that's not relevant if you really look at the whole problem.
Absolutely.
And the second thing is that if you look, there are a lot of good studies about job sharing in management positions, and you always can read that two people on one position, they are making better decisions. Decisions that they made are more accepted by the
team, huh?
By the team, because they know, okay, there already two people thought about it, and they might have more perspectives into their decisions, and the decisions are better. You have, if one people is leaving the company, you still have another one who stays there. That's why job sharing is also used for the generation change in companies. Maybe if an older person is going to leave soon and you have someone there who has a lot of knowledge, maybe you can do job sharing for a half a year, for example, with a younger people or younger person together. And if the older one leaves, you just had a knowledge transfer time and a mechanism that transfers this important knowledge into the company. So I think it's quite easy to find a lot of good reasons why job sharing makes sense.
Thank you very much for commenting on my previous experience. So, well, the fact is that I didn't really actively look for a position at that time. I was just having some conversations, yes, and those conversations made me not to take that step at that time. But similar as you, I thought, instead of paying me a certain amount of money for me being available for them once a month, yes, for a day, they could, as an employee, they could pay almost the same amount of money for me being available to them 2 days a week, yes, which is simply such a cost factor. And so really looking at people from the perspective of just headcount is not satisfactory. Maybe the FTE perspective makes it much more realistic. When you talk about research, I also found one about expected benefits, and it was studied what kind of benefits are expected by people or actually appreciated by people so that you can keep them with the company, well, imagining that they stay because of the benefits. But the real benefit that was making a real difference was the approach to working time.
Yeah.
So all the options of flexible work, remote work were really deeply appreciated. And it was also a factor why some people were deciding to stay with a certain employer rather than move elsewhere for bigger money, because they appreciated what you say, this Vereinbarkeit, yes, this way of being able to combine the work and life into the work-life fit, as we discussed in another podcast.
Yeah, and I also think today people want to have the power to decide how they live their lives, how they spend their time, when they do what. Yeah. If you have a job where it's not important if you're doing something in the morning at 10 or in the afternoon at 4 on the next day, it should be in your decision how you do it. Yeah. And I think that's what people want. They want to be able to maybe go jogging in the afternoon if the weather is nice in winter, and not going jogging in the afternoon when it's already dark. Yeah. So I think and I think it has to do with the pandemic, but it's also a change of attitude and of values in our society.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about one more advantage of this job sharing in manager position. One of the psychologically most difficult aspect of being a manager is this loneliness. Yes, you are a manager, you have your team that you are responsible for, a lot of expectations put on you both by your upper management and by the team members, and at the same time you are lonely. Yes, you are lonely. You hardly ever have the best friend at work who you can share all your trouble, yes, and all your pains. You usually need to be mindful about what you talk about, to whom. Maybe you not always have to, but many people prefer to take this cautious approach. And when you have another person sharing the same job in the same position, you naturally win a partner. Yes, you win a partner to talk to, you have a partner to discuss all your doubts, and this loneliness is disappearing. Yes, so it's actually a great space for learning and for the psychological comfort as well. I love that perspective. Now that we talked about some of the advantages, on the other hand, what are some of the challenges the part-time managers are facing from your experience?
Yeah, they have less time. I think that's the biggest challenge. So you have less time for the exchange with your employees and the personal contact. And if I talk to part-time manager, especially in a combination with remote work, the biggest challenge for them is quite often how to stay in contact personally with their team. So that's one of the big points. I think the second one, we already talked a little bit about culture, about company culture. And I think if you work in a company with a very strong presence culture, where it's important how present you are, and you are rated by how present you are, not what comes out out of your work, what the results of your work, then it's really difficult, because you can't win this battle, because you will always be the one who's less present. And I think that's a point where companies really have to have a close look and have to think about how can we change this, because this is one of the biggest problems, I think. And the third thing I want to mention is that many managers, and that's also what I see at my clients, have problems to set limits and to comply with their working hours, because most of them are very engaged people, and they're motivated. They want to show they can do it in part-time. And then there's always the danger that they lose their hours and that they're working more. If you have 30 hours if you should work 30 hours and you do 35 or 38 or 40, then it really starts to be a very, very bad deal, because you're working the same as others for less money. And this is a real danger. So I think this is a very psychological thing. Mostly when I see it, it's not that the managers of the part-time managers say you have to stay or you have to do this or that. It's just the other way around. It's what people expect from themselves, and they want to do it well. They want to be there for their team. They want to show engagement. Yeah. And many of them really have to find new ways how to do this without staying longer.
I'm imagining it might be a bit easier in the companies that have made the model of remote first present in the company. When we are remote first of all, you get rid of this presence, appreciating somebody by, sitting and being there. And that's one important factor. And the other important factor is the possibility of this asynchronous communication to stay in touch. And for example, we do it a lot in a team. We work in very various hours of day and night, and some team members also in other time zones, which, makes this shift of the overlapping time. And what we do a lot is we record a lot of voice messages. So for example, when we use Signal, WhatsApp, or some other communicators, we use it as a way not to stay in touch by not, having a meeting when we are maybe not available at the same time synchronously, but to stay in touch and have this human contact asynchronously. Yes, so somebody listens to my message, then I listen to their reply. But this requires quite a lot of flexibility from the company, and also a very good order in the sense of which communication channels have which priority. How do we deal when there is an urgent situation? Yes, because this remote first also encompasses assumption that things come when they are ready. Yes, we might have a deadline, but the rhythm of producing them is different than what we got used to in the face-to-face times. So that's what I'm thinking. What else would you advise from the perspective of an organization when we think about the structural solutions, about the systemic approaches? Yes. What else might an organization enable to make the part-time management easily manageable in a company?
Yes, I think the point you just mentioned is the asynchronous working model point is very, very important. And I just come back to this later. Firstly, I want to say the first thing I think is a good framework conditions for part-time management. And this is flexible working opportunities in time and place, the technical equipment. These are all things that should be normal today. For me, after the pandemic, it should be the normal working rhythm. But I often see there can be things optimized. For example, in Germany, we have, if we look at working time restrictions, we have several rules. And I think companies have to have a close look at their rules that they fit with the needs of the people. For example, if you work from 9 to o'clock in the afternoon every day, yeah, as a part-time manager, you might go back to your desk in the evening when your kids are in bed, yeah, maybe you just go back to your desk and do some emails, and it must be ensured that this time is not your private time you just spend for your job because you want to. It has to be working time, for example. Yeah. And things like this are just important because otherwise you make people unsatisfied, and this is really not necessary. So you just have to really have a close look at the conditions. The second thing is evaluation and promotion mechanisms. And this is a very, very important point. If you have promotion mechanisms in a company that relate, for example, to years experience in a certain position, then you have to be careful, because when you start to count part-time as only a percentage of a year, for example, and some companies do, you generate a disadvantage for the part-time people. And this is a disadvantage that can never be catched up again. So you really have to generate a situation where it isn't important if you work part-time or not. Yeah, all managers need to have the same opportunities to do the next step and to follow their career path. Mm-hmm. I think this is an important point. And the last thing, you just mentioned the asynchronous working model. And I think if you have more flexible workers at a company, sooner or later, you will end up at this point. And for many companies, this is a really big cultural change also, because it's a completely new way of working together. It's a way where you have to rely on the others. You have to rely that others do their job, also if you don't see it, and you also don't feel it that much because you're less together in meetings, for example. Yeah, you have this asynchronous communication, which you have to really think about. What am I communicating? What do I need from others? It's less blah, blah and more really, really structured communication. Mm-hmm. And these are things that people, first of all, need to be aware of. Yeah, they need to start thinking about when we really want to have part-time managers in our company. This will do something with our way of working. And the question is, do we want this, or how do we deal with this? And I think these are important questions that companies should ask and should talk about with their employees, because quite often there are a lot of fears, or I think maybe prejudices about part-time management. And I think the first thing is to talk about it. And on the other hand, listening to what people are saying and which fears there might be and what you can do that people feel better. And on the other hand, you have to make very, very clear from the top management that part-time management isn't nice to have. It's a must do, because it's one strategic element of employer branding. And it's really, really important for companies to ensure skilled workers and to ensure their success and their future.
I was recently listening to a few conversations with Dominika Bettman. She used to be the head of Siemens in Poland for the last 30 years, a very experienced woman, a very experienced person. And now she's the head of Microsoft in Poland. So you can imagine she's representing a highly technological companies. And what she's saying is that actually empowering women at work is not a choice. It's not maybe I don't know how you react to it, but it's not even an ethical question. It's a business necessity, because it's the only way how the top businesses can get access to top talent. And from my perspective, enabling the part-time, not only part-time work, but also part-time management is the road in this direction. So I'm very glad about this conversation we had today, Johanna. My last question may be, if an organization, if a company has never been doing it before, but maybe they listen to our conversation and they are interested, making the first step, what might be a first easy step in the direction of the part-time management?
Yeah, I think talking about it, as I said before, and just opening the room for a conversation about this and listening to your employees. Are there people who would like to do it? What are the prejudices? What is in the head of the people? Yeah, that's the first step. I think is just important. And then, as I said, anchor the topic in the top management and really, as you said, make clear that it's an economic question. I always rely to both to the ethical and the economic perspective, because I think for me, it's important to see both. But I completely understand if companies for communicational issues use the economic perspective. That's totally okay. But you really have to make this clear, and this has to be made clear by the top management, because otherwise you really have always strong powers that will to try to push this development back, because as we said, it is a change and it's a cultural change for the company, and it has disadvantages. For example, for people who at the moment live or work quite successful in this presence culture, they lose something when others who are successful because they really create good outcome, then the others lose. It's natural. It can't be different. So you really have to. There will be these powers in every company, so you really have to make it crystal clear that's important and we are going to do this, And the next point is then to create positive examples. You have to find people who want to do it. You have to find managers of part-time managers who are willing to start this journey, because it is a journey, and not everything will be perfect from the first moment. You have to learn, you have to find your model. As I said before, it's not easy to say, okay, we're doing it like this and then it will work. You have to find out what is our way. And the first goal should really be to create positive examples and really do this very carefully and think about, okay, whom can we choose? With whom can we start this journey? And what do people need to be successful in this role?
Johanna, thank you very much for bringing us into this topic. I appreciate it a lot. We talked about the future of work.
Thank you, Monika, for the invitation. It was very nice to be with you.
Well, it seems that the first reasonable step towards implementing part-time management solutions in your company is to simply talk about that. I imagine gathering a group of people from various roles and positions and to have a conversation structure. I would even propose this tool, which I use in some of the coaching sessions or in facilitation with groups. It's called a Socrates matrix. Sometimes we say that Socrates was an originator of the Western philosophy, or some of us say he was really the first one to use a coaching approach. Anyway, this matrix consists of 4 areas, and it goes like, what do we win if we do it? So what do we win if we implement the part-time management approach? But on the contrary, what do we lose when we implement the part-time approach? Now, what do we win if we don't implement the part-time approach? And what do we lose if we don't implement the part-time approach? I would propose you this little structure to have a conversation that is really touching each and every aspect of part-time management in your particular situation, in your particular company. By the way, if you're interested in some of additional resources that have been recommended by Johanna, or if you like to get in touch with Johanna and are looking for a link to find her, you will find all the links on the podcast website, which is www.estepahead.pro/005. So it's the number of this episode, and you can find all the notes there. On this estepahead.pro, you can also join the newsletter to stay informed about any new content, not only podcasts, but also some articles that I write around the role of a leader in a modern organization. So please be welcome to join this newsletter. I only use it for sending information about new content. And by the way, if you are interested in the role of a manager, you might also be interested in the topic of psychological safety in a team. And that's precisely what the episode number 3 was about. So you find it by going to estepahead.pro/003. And there I talk about psychological safety with Katarzyna Romanowicz, a very good episode, very instructive to leaders and to teams. And when we talk about leaders, you might also be interested in the human-centered approach, human-centered leadership, where I have a discussion with Kinga Jaśkowiak from Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, talking about what they do as a company, why she finds it an unobtainable, again, direction in the way we manage people, especially in remote positions. So you find it by going to estepahead.pro/001. Thank you for being together in this conversation with Johanna Fink today, and staying in touch for the future. Goodbye.